The crack of gunfire split the autumn air as Zara Reynolds ducked behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Dodge City, Kansas in 1876 was no place for a woman alone, especially one with 3 angry men on her trail and a satchel full of evidence that could hang the most powerful man in the county. She went this way. A gruff voice called out, boots pounding the dusty street. Find her before she gets to the marshal. Zara clutched the leather satchel tighter to her chest, her breathing shallow as she risked a glance around the edge of the trough. The 3 men, Silas, Emmett, and Brock, were spreading out, checking between buildings and peering into barrels. They were Caldwell's men, ruthless enforcers who'd do anything to bring her back to face their boss's wrath. 2 weeks ago, she'd been merely a bookkeeper at Caldwell's saloon. 2 weeks ago, she hadn't known about the land deeds, the bribes, or the murders. 2 weeks ago, her brother had still been alive. A rough hand clamped over her mouth as someone pulled her backward. Zara thrashed against the iron grip until a low voice whispered in her ear, "Keep still if you want to live." The stranger dragged her deeper into the shadows between the general store and the blacksmith shop. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face partially concealed by a bandana pulled up over his nose. All she could see were intense blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn Stetson. "I'm not with them," he murmured, slowly removing his hand from her mouth. "Name's Preston Hayes. I've been tracking Caldwell's operation for months." "How do I know you're not one of his men?" Zara hissed, clutching the satchel even tighter. The man Preston pulled down his bandana briefly, revealing a face with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. "Because I'm the one who sent your brother the telegram to start investigating Caldwell in the first place." Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the street. "Check the alley." "She can't have gone far." Preston grabbed her wrist. "No time to explain. My horse is behind the livery." They ran in a crouch along the narrow passageway, Zara's skirts catching on crates and barrels. As they reached the corner of the livery stable, a bullet splintered the wood next to her head. "There she is." Emmett's voice rang out. "Got the thieving woman." Preston shoved her behind him, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion and returning fire. The outlaws scattered for cover, but they were closing in fast.
"Go."
Around back, Preston ordered, firing again to keep the men pinned down. Zara ran, heart in her throat, rounding the corner to find a magnificent chestnut stallion pawing nervously at the ground, already saddled and ready. She hesitated, uncertain if she could trust this stranger. The decision was made for her when Preston bolted around the corner, holstering his gun. Without a word, he vaulted into the saddle, then reached down for her. "Take my hand." Zara could hear Caldwell's men shouting, their boots pounding closer. She thrust the satchel into her bodice, gripped Preston's forearm, and let him haul her up behind him. The horse shifted under their combined weight, snorting as Preston dug his heels in. "Hold on tight," he called over his shoulder. Zara wrapped her arms around his waist just as the horse lunged forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath them. They thundered past the rear of the livery and out into the open prairie beyond the town limits. Gunshots cracked behind them, but Preston kept the horse at a gallop, weaving slightly to make them a harder target. Zara clung to him, the wind tearing at her hair as they raced across the golden grassland, leaving Dodge City and her old life behind in a cloud of dust. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Preston finally slowed the horse to a walk, guiding it toward a stand of cottonwoods along a narrow creek. "We'll rest here briefly," he said, helping her down. "They'll have horses, but they'll need time to gather supplies. We have a head start." Zara's legs trembled as she stood on solid ground again. Her carefully pinned hair had come loose during their flight, tumbling in wild auburn waves past her shoulders. "Who are you really?" she demanded, keeping her distance as Preston led the horse to drink. "And how did you know my brother?" Preston removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his neck. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "I used to ride with the Texas Rangers," he explained, filling a canteen from the creek. "Now I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Your brother James was my informant in Dodge." Zara's throat tightened at the mention of her brother's name. James never mentioned any detective.
He wouldn't have.
It would have put you both in danger. Preston offered her the canteen. "I'm sorry about what happened to him. By the time I got word, it was too late." She accepted the water, their fingers brushing briefly. "Caldwell had him killed because James discovered the land deeds, didn't he?" Preston nodded grimly. "Caldwell's been forcing ranchers off their land for years, forging documents, bribing officials. Your brother found proof. It's all in here." Zara patted her bodice, where the satchel was hidden. Every deed, every forged signature, every bribe. Even the names of the men Caldwell paid to kill those who wouldn't sell. Preston's eyes widened slightly. "That's why they want you back so badly. With that evidence, Caldwell would hang. And now they want me to hang for stealing it." Zara handed back the canteen. "Where can we go?" "The county marshal is in Caldwell's pocket. We need to get to Topeka. I have contacts there in the federal marshal's office." Preston glanced at the sun. "It's a 4-day ride if we push hard. 5 if we're careful. And if Caldwell's men catch up to us before then?" Preston's hand rested on his holster. "They won't. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice made her want to believe him, despite everything she'd learned about trusting men in the past year. Since her father's death, she'd been fending for herself in a world that offered women few choices and little respect. "I can ride," she said firmly. "And I can shoot. James taught me." A ghost of a smile touched Preston's lips.
"Good.
We may need both skills before this is over." They mounted up again, Preston in the saddle and Zara seated behind him, her arms circling his waist. As they rode away from the creek, she couldn't help but notice the solid warmth of him, the way his muscles moved beneath her hands as he guided the horse. It had been a long time since she'd been this close to a man, and never one who'd risked his life to save hers. By nightfall, they'd put considerable distance between themselves and Dodge City, riding through rolling prairie and scattered woodland. Preston led them to a sheltered hollow where a small spring bubbled up from the ground. "We'll camp here," he decided, swinging down from the saddle. "There's enough cover to hide our fire, and the spring gives us water." Zara slid down, wincing as her muscles protested the long hours of riding. Her dress was torn at the hem, dusty and rumpled beyond salvation. Preston moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to life on the trail, unsaddling the horse and setting up a small camp while Zara gathered kindling for a fire. When the flames were crackling softly, he produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "Not much of a supper," he apologized, offering her a share. "I've had worse." Zara accepted the food gratefully. After her brother's death, there had been days when she hadn't eaten at all, saving every penny to buy passage out of Dodge. They ate in silence for a while, the fire casting dancing shadows across their faces. Finally, Preston spoke. "How did you get the documents?" Zara stared into the flames. "After James was killed, I knew I couldn't stay at the saloon. Caldwell was watching me too closely. But I needed money to leave town." She took a deep breath. "So I offered to help organize his office. He'd seen me keeping the books, knew I was good with numbers and papers." "And he trusted you?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Hardly. But he underestimated me. Thought I was just a grieving sister who needed the work." Preston nodded, encouraging her to continue. "For weeks, I cataloged every document, every letter. Gradually, I started to see the pattern James had discovered. Land deeds with forged signatures. Letters discussing, removing obstacles. Records of payments to the marshal, the judge. She met Preston's gaze across the fire. 3 nights ago, Caldwell got drunk and passed out in his office. I took everything I needed and ran. Brave, Preston remarked quietly. And dangerous. I had nothing left to lose. Zara's voice hardened. I want justice for James. For all the others Caldwell has killed. Preston poked at the fire with a stick. Justice is hard to come by out here. Is that why you left the Rangers? A shadow crossed his face. Something like that. Let's just say I learned that a badge doesn't always mean a man stands for what's right. They fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Preston spread a bedroll near the fire. You should rest. I'll take first watch. Zara hesitated, then settled onto the blanket, her back to the fire. She was exhausted, her body aching from the day's ride, but sleep seemed impossible with danger so close behind them. To her surprise, Preston began to hum softly, a gentle melody that reminded her of the lullabies her mother used to sing. The simple kindness of it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away fiercely, unwilling to show such weakness. My mother used to sing that, she whispered. Mine too, Preston replied. Get some sleep, Miss Reynolds. Tomorrow will be another long day. Despite her fears, Zara drifted into slumber, lulled by the crackling fire, the soft nickering of the horse, and Preston's steady presence, keeping watch in the darkness. She woke before dawn to the smell of coffee. Preston had already rekindled the fire and was checking his revolver, methodically loading each chamber. Good morning, he said, nodding toward a tin cup steaming by the fire. Thought you might need that. Zara sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. Thank you. She accepted the coffee gratefully, the bitter warmth helping to clear the fog of sleep. Any sign of trouble? Not yet, but they'll be coming. Preston holstered his weapon and began rolling up his bedding. We should reach the Whitewater River by midday. Once we cross, we'll be harder to track. They broke camp efficiently, erasing all signs of their presence. As they mounted the horse again, Zara noticed Preston wincing slightly. You're hurt, she said, suddenly remembering the gunfight in Dodge City. He shook his head dismissively. Just grazed my side. Nothing serious. Let me see. Her tone brooked no argument. Reluctantly, Preston lifted his shirt to reveal a shallow furrow across his ribs, crusted with dried blood. You call that a graze? It needs cleaning before it festers. Zara slid from the horse and rummaged in her pocket, producing a clean handkerchief. She soaked it in water from the spring and returned to his side. Hold still. Preston complied, watching her with an unreadable expression as she gently cleaned the wound. Her fingers worked deftly, her touch light but sure. You've done this before, he observed. My father was a doctor before we came west. Zara finished her ministrations and stepped back. That should help, but we'll need to find some whiskey to properly clean it when we can. Preston lowered his shirt, a new respect in his eyes. Thank you, Miss Reynolds. Zara, she corrected him. If we're going to be running for our lives together, you might as well use my given name. A smile tugged at his mouth. Zara, then. And I'm Preston, not Mr. Hayes. The familiarity felt strange, but right somehow, as if the normal rules of society had been suspended in their flight across the prairie. They remounted, settling into what was becoming a familiar rhythm, her arms around his waist, her body pressed against his back as the horse carried them eastward. The morning passed in relative silence, both of them watchful for any sign of pursuit. The landscape gradually changed from open prairie to rolling hills dotted with stands of oak and hickory. By midday, as Preston had predicted, they reached the Whitewater River, its waters running swift and clear between steep banks. There's a ford a mile downstream, Preston said, guiding the horse along the riverbank. Shallow enough to cross safely. They had just reached the ford when the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both stiffen. Preston reined in the horse, turning to scan the way they had come. On a ridge perhaps half a mile back, 3 riders appeared, silhouetted against the sky. "Caldwell's men," Zara whispered, her arms tightening around Preston's waist. "They've pushed their horses hard to catch up this quickly." Preston turned back to the river. "We need to cross now." He urged the horse forward into the water. The chestnut stallion stepped carefully on the rocky riverbed, water swirling around its legs. Halfway across, with the water reaching the horse's belly, the first gunshot rang out. The bullet struck the water several yards away, sending up a spray that startled the horse. It reared slightly, almost unseating them both. Preston fought to control the animal as more shots followed. "Hold on," he shouted, spurring the horse forward. They plunged through the remaining stretch of river, water splashing up around them as bullets continued to kick up spray nearby. The horse scrambled up the far bank, hooves slipping on wet stones before finding purchase on solid ground. Preston didn't hesitate, pushing the stallion into a gallop as soon as they cleared the riverbank. They thundered into a dense stand of trees, branches whipping past as they rode deeper into the forest. Behind them, Zara could hear shouts and splashing as their pursuers entered the river. Preston guided the horse through the trees with remarkable skill, taking a winding path that would be difficult to follow. After nearly 20 minutes of hard riding, he finally slowed, listening intently. The forest around them was quiet except for birdsong and the sound of their own breathing. "I think we've lost them for now," Preston said, patting the horse's neck. "This old boy deserves a rest." They dismounted in a small clearing, both soaked from the river crossing. Zara wrung water from her skirts as best she could, while Preston checked that the saddlebags were intact. "They're persistent," Zara observed, glancing nervously back the way they had come. Caldwell must have promised them a generous reward. Preston loosened the horse's girth to give it some relief. "Or threaten them with something worse if they fail. He's not a man who accepts failure." Zara shivered, though whether from the wet clothes or the memory of Caldwell's cold eyes, she couldn't say. Preston noticed her trembling and without a word, removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle amidst their desperate flight, that Zara found herself blinking back tears again. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the coat tighter around her. It smelled of leather, tobacco, and something uniquely Preston, a scent that was rapidly becoming familiar and oddly comforting. "We should keep moving," he said after the horse had rested briefly. "There's a homestead about 10 miles east of here. Friends of mine. We can get supplies, maybe fresh horses." As they continued their journey, the forest gradually thinned, giving way to scattered farmland. Fields of ripening corn and wheat stretched beside the trail, punctuated by the occasional farmhouse or barn. It was late afternoon when they crested a hill and saw a modest homestead nestled in the valley below, a 2-story farmhouse, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all surrounded by well-tended fields. "That's the Sullivan place," Preston explained. "Matthew Sullivan served with me in the Rangers. He and his wife Sarah settled here 5 years ago." They approached the farm cautiously, Preston alert for any sign of danger. A man working in the field spotted them and raised a hand in greeting. As they drew closer, Zara could see he was middle-aged, with a weathered face and powerful shoulders. "Preston Hayes," the man called out, setting down his tools and striding toward them. "Been a long while, partner." Preston dismounted, a genuine smile breaking across his face as he clasped the man's hand. "Good to see you, Matt. We're in a bit of trouble and could use some help." Matthew Sullivan's expression grew serious as he took in Zara's bedraggled appearance and their exhausted horse. "Whatever you need. Sarah's in the house. She'll want to fuss over your lady friend here." "This is Zara Reynolds," Preston said, helping her down from the horse. "She's under my protection." The simple declaration sent an unexpected warmth through Zara, despite their dire circumstances. Preston's hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary as she found her footing. "Any friend of Preston's is welcome here," Matthew said, nodding respectfully to Zara. "Come on inside. You both look like you could use a hot meal and dry clothes." Sarah Sullivan proved to be a kind-faced woman with practical hands and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Zara and immediately whisked her upstairs to change into dry clothes, asking no questions about their sudden appearance or bedraggled state. "These were my sisters," Sarah explained, laying out a simple but clean dress and undergarments. "She was about your size. And you'll want a hot bath. I'll have the boys bring up water." Zara nearly wept at the kindness. "I don't know how to thank you." Sarah waved away her gratitude. "Any woman riding with Preston Hayes is running from something serious. I don't need to know what it is unless you want to tell me." While Zara bathed and changed, Preston explained the situation to Matthew in the barn as they tended to the tired horse. "Caldwell's bad business," Matthew said grimly when Preston finished. "Heard stories about him, even out here. You're right to get that evidence to federal authorities." "His men aren't far behind us," Preston cautioned. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Matthew snorted. "Wouldn't be the first time.
We can handle ourselves."
"You two rest tonight. Take fresh horses in the morning. I'll have the boys keep watch." By sunset, Zara found herself sitting at the Sullivans' kitchen table, dressed in clean clothes, her hair freshly washed and braided by Sarah's capable hands. The simple farm meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread was the best thing she'd tasted in months. Preston, too, had cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt borrowed from Matthew. The wound on his side had been properly cleaned and bandaged. Sitting across from her at the table, he looked younger, less careworn, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled at something Matthew said. For the first time since her brother's death, Zara felt a moment of peace. The satchel of documents was safely hidden in Sarah's linen cupboard for the night. The doors were locked, and Matthew's two grown sons were keeping watch from the barn and the edge of the property. After dinner, while the men discussed routes to Topeka, Sarah drew Zara into the parlor. "He's a good man, Preston Hayes," the older woman said, picking up her knitting. "One of the best Matthew ever rode with." "He saved my life," Zara acknowledged, sinking into a comfortable chair by the fireplace. Sarah's needles clicked rhythmically. "Known him long?" 2 days, Zara admitted with a small laugh that surprised her. "It feels much longer." "That's how it is sometimes." Sarah glanced toward the kitchen where the men's voices drifted out. "Matthew and I knew each other 3 days before we decided to marry. When it's right, time doesn't matter much." Zara felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that between us. He's just helping me get to Topeka." Sarah gave her a knowing look, but didn't press the issue. "The guest room is ready for you. Preston can sleep in the boys' old room." Later, as Zara lay in the unfamiliar bed, she found her thoughts returning to Preston. The way his arms had felt around her when he pulled her onto his horse. The gentle strength in his hands. The determination in his eyes when he promised to protect her. She told herself it was merely gratitude she was feeling. Or perhaps the natural response to danger, finding comfort in the one person who stood between her and harm. It couldn't be anything more. Not when her life was in such turmoil, not when she barely knew him. Yet when she finally drifted to sleep, it was Preston's face she saw in her dreams. Dawn came too soon, gray light filtering through the curtains. Zara dressed quickly in her borrowed clothes, securing the precious satchel inside a special pocket Sarah had sewn into the dress the night before. Downstairs, she found Preston and Matthew already awake, studying a map spread across the kitchen table. "If you take this route," Matthew was saying, tracing a line with his finger, "you'll avoid the main roads where Caldwell's men might be watching." Preston nodded, glancing up as Zara entered. Something in his expression shifted, softened, before he returned his attention to the map. "Good morning," she said, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "Morning," he replied. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected." She accepted a cup of coffee from Sarah, who was busy packing food for their journey. "We should leave soon," Preston said. Matthew's boys reported riders passing on the main road late last night, heading east. Caldwell's men. "Probably. They must have lost our trail at the river, but guess we'd head for Topeka." Preston folded the map. "We'll take a different route. Stay off the main roads." Matthew's sons had already saddled 2 fresh horses, a sturdy bay gelding for Preston and a dappled mare for Zara. Their saddlebags were packed with food, water, and ammunition. "The mare's gentle but sure-footed," Matthew assured Zara as she stroked the horse's velvety nose. "She'll serve you well." "This is too much kindness," Zara protested. "We can't take your horses." "Consider it a loan," Sarah said firmly, pressing a bundle of clothes into Zara's hands. "And these two. Can't have you riding in just one dress." The farewells were brief, but heartfelt. As they mounted up to leave, Matthew pulled Preston aside for a final word, while Sarah hugged Zara tightly. "Remember what I said," the older woman whispered. "When it's right, you know it." Before Zara could respond, Sarah stepped back, and Preston was beside her, ready to depart. With final waves of gratitude, they rode away from the Sullivan farm, heading northeast on a narrow trail that wound through stands of timber and across small streams. For the first time since their flight began, Zara rode her own mount rather than sharing Preston's. The independence felt good, though she found herself oddly missing the closeness they'd shared before. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, alert for any sign of pursuit. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, which Preston declared was in their favor. "We'll hide our tracks better," he explained, and might convince Caldwell's men to seek shelter rather than push on. As if on cue, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a steady downpour. They pulled up their collars and continued riding, the horses' hooves splashing through newly forming puddles. By midday, they were both soaked despite their best efforts. When they came upon an abandoned trapper's cabin nestled in a grove of trees, Preston decided they should wait out the worst of the storm. The cabin was small but intact, with a stone fireplace and a crude wooden table. Preston said about building a fire, while Zara wrung water from her hair and clothing. "At least the rain will keep Caldwell's men off our trail for a while," she said, watching as Preston coaxed the kindling into flame. "If we're lucky." Preston added larger sticks to the growing fire. "Though in my experience, luck is a fickle friend out here." "You've been on the run before?" Preston poked at the fire, his expression distant. "Not like this. But I've tracked men who were. Seen how desperation can make them careless." "Is that what we are? Desperate?" Zara moved closer to the fire, seeking its warmth. "Cautious," Preston corrected. "There's a difference." The fire blazed higher, casting a golden glow across the cabin's interior. Outside, rain drummed on the roof and wind whistled through the trees. The small space felt oddly intimate, cut off from the world by the storm. Preston unwrapped some of the food Sarah had packed: bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. They ate in silence for a while, listening to the rain. "Why did you help me?" Zara finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "You could have just taken the evidence and left me behind." Preston looked up, surprised. "What kind of man would that make me?" "A practical one." "I'm slowing you down." He shook his head. "You're risking everything to bring Caldwell to justice. For your brother. For all his victims." His eyes met hers across the fire. "That kind of courage deserves respect, not abandonment." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of the connection that had been growing since that first desperate ride from Dodge City. "Tell me about your brother," Preston said softly. Zara's throat tightened. No one had asked her about James since his death. Most people in Dodge had been too afraid of Caldwell to even acknowledge it. James was brilliant, she began. Could have been anything he wanted, doctor, lawyer. But he loved adventure. When our parents died of fever 3 years ago, he decided we should go west. She smiled sadly. He had such dreams for us in Dodge City. A new start. What happened? At first, things were good. James got work as a clerk at the land office. I found a position keeping books at Caldwell's saloon. Then James started noticing discrepancies in land transfers. Properties changing hands under suspicious circumstances. Zara stared into the fire. He kept investigating, even when I begged him to let it go. That was when he contacted me, Preston said. I'd put out word through my Pinkerton connections that I was gathering evidence against Caldwell. A month ago, James didn't come home. Zara's voice grew hollow. They found his body the next morning in an alley. Said it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing was taken. Not his watch, not his wallet. Preston reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. I'm sorry, Zara. Truly. The simple touch, the genuine sympathy in his voice, broke something inside her. Tears she'd been holding back for weeks spilled down her cheeks. Without a word, Preston moved to sit beside her, drawing her against his chest as she wept. His arms around her felt like shelter from more than just the storm outside. Zara couldn't remember the last time she'd allowed herself to be this vulnerable, this open with her grief. I miss him so much, she whispered against Preston's shirt. He was all the family I had left. I know. Preston's hand stroked her hair gently. When this is over, when Caldwell faces justice, it won't bring James back. But it might bring you some peace. Zara looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. And what about you? What peace are you seeking? A shadow crossed his face. I've seen too many men like Caldwell escape justice because they had money or connections. Men who thought the law didn't apply to them. His jaw tightened. That's why I left the Rangers. Too many compromises, too many blind eyes turned. And the Pinkertons let you pursue justice your way? More or less. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. They're more concerned with results than methods. The fire popped and crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but the worst of the storm seemed to be passing. Still, neither of them moved to break their embrace. Preston, Zara said softly, if we make it to Topeka, if Caldwell is brought to justice. What then? His blue eyes searched her face. What do you want to happen? It was a question no one had asked her in years what she wanted. Her life had been defined by duty, by survival, by others' expectations for so long. I don't know, she admitted. I haven't let myself think beyond bringing Caldwell down. Preston's hand came up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. You could go anywhere, do anything. You're free to choose. The tenderness in his touch made her breath catch. And you? Where will you go when this is over? I hadn't given it much thought either. His voice dropped lower. Until now. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something neither had dared acknowledge before this moment. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Preston lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When Zara responded, sliding her hands up to his shoulders, it deepened into something more urgent, more honest than any words they could have spoken. When they finally broke apart, both breathing quickly, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I didn't plan this, he murmured. Nor did I. Zara's hands remained on his shoulders, unwilling to let go. But I'm not sorry. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face. Neither am I. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of hoofbeats, barely audible over the diminishing rain. They sprang apart, instantly alert. Could be travelers seeking shelter from the storm, Zara whispered, though she didn't believe it. Preston moved to the cabin's single window, peering cautiously through the grimy glass. 3 riders coming fast. It's them. Fear shot through Zara, but it was different now, not just fear for herself, but for Preston as well. How did they find us? Doesn't matter. Preston was already gathering their things, dousing the fire. We need to go. Now. They slipped out the back of the cabin, retrieving their horses from where they'd been sheltered beneath a lean-to. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was muddy and treacherous. Stay close, Preston instructed as they mounted up. We'll head for the creek we crossed earlier. The high water might throw them off our trail. They rode at a careful trot, wary of the slick ground. Behind them, shouts indicated that Caldwell's men had discovered the cabin and realized they'd just missed their quarry. The creek, when they reached it, had swollen with rainwater, its current swift and brown with mud. Preston surveyed it grimly. Too dangerous to cross here, he decided. We'll ride alongside it until we find a safer ford. They followed the creek for nearly a mile, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Finally, they came to a spot where the water spread wider and seemed shallower, with large rocks breaking the surface. This is our best chance, Preston said. I'll go first. Follow exactly where I cross. He urged his horse into the water. The bay stepped carefully from rock to rock, water swirling around its legs. Halfway across, the horse slipped slightly but recovered, continuing to the far bank. Preston turned back, gesturing for Zara to follow. She guided her mare into the creek, focusing on retracing Preston's path. The water was cold, soaking her boots and the hem of her dress. The mare picked her way cautiously, snorting nervously at the rushing current. They were nearly across when gunshots rang out from the bank behind them. Zara's mare reared in panic, almost unseating her. She clung desperately to the saddle as the horse lurched forward, scrambling for purchase on the slippery creek bed. Zara, Preston shouted, spurring his mount back toward the water. More shots followed, bullets splashing into the creek around them. Zara's mare finally found solid ground, lunging up the far bank where Preston caught the reins, steadying the frightened animal. Are you hit? He demanded, his eyes scanning her for injuries. No, she gasped, still clinging to the saddle. I'm all right. On the opposite bank, Caldwell's men had dismounted, taking cover behind trees as they continued firing. Preston drew his revolver, returning fire to force them back. They'll have to find another crossing, he said, holstering his weapon. That buys us some time. They rode hard through the forest, the terrain gradually rising as they approached a ridge of limestone bluffs. The rain had stopped completely now, the late afternoon sun breaking through the clouds to cast long shadows through the trees. At the base of the bluffs, Preston suddenly reined in his horse, listening intently. Zara pulled up beside him, breathless from their flight. What is it? Riders coming from the east, he said grimly. They've split up to surround us. Zara's heart sank. We're trapped. Preston scanned the bluffs, his expression determined. Not yet, we're not. Can you climb? He led them to a narrow trail that wound up the face of the bluff. They dismounted, Preston slapping both horses on the rumps to send them running. They'll follow the horses first, he explained, guiding Zara to the trail. By the time they realize we're not with them, we'll be well hidden. The climb was steep and treacherous, loose stones sliding beneath their boots. Zara's muscles burned with the effort, but she pushed on, Preston close behind her. Near the top, the trail narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for one person. Don't look down, Preston advised, his hand steady at her back. Just keep moving. They reached the summit as shouts echoed from below. Caldwell's men had discovered their abandoned horses. Preston pulled Zara into the shelter of a shallow cave just below the ridgeline. We'll wait until dark, he whispered. Then make our way northeast. We're less than 20 miles from Topeka now. The cave was little more than an indentation in the rock, forcing them to sit close together as they caught their breath. Through a gap in the rocks, they could see Caldwell's men searching the base of the bluffs. They're determined, Zara observed, her voice low. Caldwell must have promised them a fortune to bring you back. Preston's arms slipped around her shoulders, drawing her closer as the temperature began to drop with the setting sun. They sat in silence for a time, watching as their pursuers lit torches and continued to search the area. The tension of their situation should have been overwhelming, yet Zara found herself drawing strength from Preston's presence, from the solid warmth of him beside her. Earlier in the cabin, she began hesitantly, before we were interrupted. Preston's arm tightened slightly around her. Yes. Did you mean what you said? About not having thought about what comes after this is over. He was quiet for a moment. I meant it, but things change. His voice dropped lower. People change when they find someone worth changing for. Zara turned to face him in the growing darkness. Is that what I am to you? Instead of answering with words, Preston kissed her again, this time with a certainty that left no doubt of his feelings. Zara responded with equal fervor, her hands threading into his hair as she pressed closer. When they finally broke apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I've known you less than 3 days, Zara Reynolds, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. The simple declaration, spoken in the darkness of their hiding place with danger all around them, struck Zara with its truth. She had never believed in love at first sight, in the kind of instant connection that her parents had spoken of or that Sarah Sullivan had described. Yet here it was, undeniable and powerful. I feel it too, she whispered. Is that madness? Preston chuckled softly. If it is, then we're both mad. His expression grew serious again. When this is over, when you're safe, I want to see where this leads. If you'll give me that chance. Yes, Zara said without hesitation. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you. They sealed their agreement with another kiss, this one a promise for the future they both now dared to imagine. As full darkness descended, the torches below began to move away, Caldwell's men apparently giving up their search of the immediate area. Preston and Zara waited another hour to be certain, then carefully made their way down from their hiding place on the opposite side of the bluff. The journey through the night was arduous on foot, but they pushed on, guided by the stars and Preston's unerring sense of direction. By dawn, they had covered nearly 10 miles, putting significant distance between themselves and their pursuers. They rested briefly in a farmer's abandoned barn, sharing the last of their food and catching a few hours of much-needed sleep. Preston held Zara close as they slept, both drawing comfort from the contact. When they set out again, the sun was high in a clear blue sky. The landscape had changed, with more signs of civilization appearing: fenced fields, occasional farmhouses in the distance, and, finally, a proper road. That's the Kansas River, Preston said as they crested a hill in the late afternoon. In the valley below, a broad river wound its way through the landscape, and on its far bank, a city spread out Topeka. We made it, Zara breathed, scarcely able to believe their ordeal was nearly over. Preston squeezed her hand. Not quite yet. We still need to get across the river and find Marshal Wilson before Caldwell's men realize where we are. They followed the road toward the city, watchful for any sign of pursuit. As they approached the river crossing, Preston suddenly pulled Zara into the shelter of a roadside stand of trees. Riders coming, he whispered, drawing his revolver. 4 horsemen appeared, heading toward them from the direction of Topeka. Zara's heart raced, her hand going to the satchel hidden in her dress. Had Caldwell somehow gotten word to allies in the city? Preston tensed beside her, ready to fight if necessary. But as the riders drew nearer, his posture suddenly relaxed. It's all right, he said, holstering his weapon. Those are federal marshals. I recognize the lead rider. He stepped out onto the road, waving to catch their attention. The riders slowed, hands going to their weapons until the leader recognized Preston. "Hayes," the man called out, urging his horse forward. "Matthew Sullivan's message reached us yesterday. We've been searching for you since dawn." Relief washed over Zara as Preston quickly explained their situation to the marshal. Within minutes, they were being escorted into Topeka, protected by federal lawmen. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of statements and testimonies. The evidence Zara had stolen from Caldwell's office proved to be even more damning than they had realized. Federal warrants were issued not only for Caldwell himself, but for a dozen of his associates, including the corrupt local marshal and judge. Through it all, Preston remained at Zara's side, a steady presence as she recounted her brother's murder and Caldwell's crimes. When she finally handed over the last of the documents to the federal authorities, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of fear and vengeance she had carried since James's death. "It's really over," she said to Preston as they left the federal building on the third day. "They told me Caldwell was arrested this morning in Dodge City." Preston nodded, taking her hand as they walked through the streets of Topeka. "Justice moves faster when the evidence is irrefutable. Your brother would be proud of what you've done." Zara squeezed his hand, blinking back tears. "What happens now?" They stopped at a small park overlooking the river. The setting sun painted the water gold and crimson, a beautiful end to a tumultuous journey. "That depends on you," Preston said, turning to face her. "The Pinkertons have offered me a new assignment in Colorado, tracking a gang of train robbers." He paused, his blue eyes intent on hers. "But I'm thinking of declining." "Why?" Zara asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Because there's something I want more than another case." Preston took both her hands in his. "I meant what I said in that cave, Zara. These past few days have changed everything for me. I don't want to go back to the life I had before." "What do you want instead?" "A life with you," he said simply. "If you'll have me." Zara's heart swelled with an emotion she had never expected to feel again after so much lost hope. "Are you proposing, Preston Hayes?" A smile broke across his face. "I believe I am, though I don't have a ring yet." He dropped to one knee right there in the park, still holding her hands. "Zara Reynolds, will you marry me? Will you build a new life with me, wherever that may lead us?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Preston rose, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, he kept his arms around her waist. "I was thinking we might go to California," he suggested. "Start fresh where Caldwell's shadow doesn't reach. I have some money saved. Enough to buy a small ranch, perhaps." "California," Zara repeated, liking the sound of it. "Where the sun shines and the past can't find us." "Where we can make new memories," Preston agreed. "Better ones." They were married a week later in Topeka, with Matthew and Sarah Sullivan making the journey to stand as witnesses. Sarah embraced Zara after the ceremony, whispering, "I told you, when it's right you know it." 2 months later, Preston and Zara Hayes stood on a hillside overlooking a small valley in Northern California. Below them lay a modest ranch house and barn, surrounded by rolling pastures and backed by a forest of towering redwoods. "What do you think?" Preston asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "Is it everything I promised?" Zara leaned into his embrace, her hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach where their child was just beginning to show. "It's perfect," she said. "Our new beginning." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber, Preston turned Zara in his arms and kissed her deeply. From that desperate moment in Dodge City when he had pulled her onto his horse and ridden away from danger, to this peaceful hillside where their future stretched before them, their journey had been unexpected, dangerous, and ultimately beautiful. "I love you, Zara Hayes," Preston murmured against her lips. "And I love you," she replied, her heart full with the knowledge that sometimes the most perilous journeys lead to the most perfect destinations.